The biggest learning that I had from that experience, that first time doing Agile, is just go, get started. You'll learn, you'll adjust, take small steps, look at the results, adapt, iterate. Don't wait till you think you know it all and you're perfectly ready, waiting for that perfect project, to go Agile. You'll never get there.
Technology is transforming how we think, how we lead, and how we win. From Intervision, this is Status Go, the show helping IT leaders move beyond the status quo, master their craft, and propel their IT vision.
Ask a room full of IT professionals to define Agile, and you're likely to get as many different answers as people in the room. Ask that same group if they practice Agile at their organization, and you're likely to hear something like, well, we do some kind of Agile, but we're learning every day. On the surface, Agile may sound easy, but Agile transformation is hard work. Today's guest has led successful Agile transformations in a variety of organizations. As the Vice President of IT Strategy and Operational Excellence at C&O Financial Group, Patrick Bogan is leading an Agile transformation at enterprise scale. We're going to talk about this journey and how they have overcome some pretty significant obstacles along the way. Welcome to Status Go, Patrick.
Thanks, Jeff. Super excited to be here and talk Agile. Looking forward to it.
I am too, because I don't know if you know this, but you are probably the one that first introduced me to the concept of Agile.
Really? Okay.
Back when you and I first met, and some of the projects that you were working on that time, and I think through a mutual friend of ours, Aaron Copel, that was my introduction. So I'm looking forward to diving in.
Okay, sounds good.
Before we get there, before we start talking Agile specifically, I'd love to hear about your career journey and how you ended up getting involved in Agile to begin with.
Sure. Maybe before I share some of my background, how I got there, maybe a quick level set on what Agile is, or at least in the context of this.
Oh, that's a great idea. Yeah, we should start at the beginning, right?
Yeah. And Agile, Agile is just, it's a way of thinking, a way of doing things, a way to deliver value faster. It grew out of software development, but it really can apply to anything. There's Agile frameworks and tools out there that everybody's heard of: Scrum and Kanban and Safe and Jira and all these cool tools. I mean, those are things that you use to do Agile. And then there's an Agile mindset. That's about experimentation and close collaboration with your customer and short iterations and getting fast feedback and embracing change, really. And that's more about being Agile than doing Agile. And we're going to touch on both today, but most of what we'll talk about is that Agile mindset, being Agile. So just a level set on Agile there. Some of my background: Purdue graduate, started out as a COBOL programmer for Alcoa.
Oh, yay, COBOL.
Yeah, in Newburgh, Indiana, many years ago. It wasn't too long before I got into project management, evolved into bigger program management, and spent a lot of years doing consulting, delivering big stuff. I was first exposed to Agile thinking quite a few years ago when I was doing consulting as a program manager. At one of my clients, we started experimenting with more frequent iterative delivery, and we got to the point where we were delivering something every month. And of course, we started getting feedback every month as well, and really started changing how we planned and how we delivered and how we did things, and didn't know it at the time, but looking back at it, that was an Agile mindset. We were being Agile there and delivering more frequently. But first real Agile transformation that I was involved in started back in 2012, which is 10 years ago now. I was CIO for Fusion Analytics, a small long-term care insurance company. And we had built some, I thought pretty cool analytics tools we were using to run the business, better understand business performance, predict what was going to happen next, some business intelligence tools. It was really all about driving better decision making, really. And we had this idea, this big idea. We thought if we needed these tools and they helped us run our insurance company, we thought, well, other long-term care insurance companies might benefit from these analytics tools as well. So let's turn them into products. Let's sell them.
Ah,
That was our big idea, and we spent about a year trying to do that kind of on the side, if you will, productize what we had built, and didn't see the progress we'd hoped. And
mhm,
this is back in the early days of SaaS multi-tenant solutions. So it
right.
wasn't as clear as it is today to how to go about stuff like that. But we had some vision. We had some ideas. We just weren't really sure how to do it, how to build this product. And we weren't really focused the way we should have been. We were kind of working part time on the side on this product. I mean, we were an insurance company.
Yeah, it's hard to do that on the side. Yeah,
Hard to
yeah.
do that. Priorities were a challenge, and there were other issues. But we built some stuff, but we just didn't have real results that we were hoping for. So realized we got to do something different, or stop doing
Mhm.
this. There was a guy on my team, William Long. He brought up Agile, and we started researching and talking to some people, looking into it, and some things got my attention that Agile talked about, if you will.
Mhm.
Delivering more frequently, which I had recalled from my earlier experiences I just mentioned, and
Yeah,
a different way of collaborating directly with your customers on what you're building, and it was a way to figure out what we were going to do as we went, because we didn't really know the full roadmap and the plan, and this gave us a way to reprioritize as needed.
yeah.
It's not a bad thing to reprioritize, honestly. And so it was a way to accommodate change. It was actually built in, and thought there might be something here. It's worth a try to pursue this agile thing. So I put
Mhm.
together a proposal for my boss, the CEO, and let's experiment and try this out. And we called it a 120-day full court press. I'm a basketball guy, so full
Yeah,
court press was our slogan of what this was. And we said, let's go all in for a few months and measure success. We kind of talked about it as like kind of startup mode.
yeah.
We dedicated a team. We moved them all into one room, including me. We actually moved to another building, to kind of separate the day to day from the building of something new. And we hired some agile expertise, and we got some training. We all studied the Agile Manifesto and the Scrum Guide, and
Mhm.
which only take about 10 minutes to read. Honestly, there's not much there, but talking about it and studying it and trying to incorporate it in, that's some work.
Yeah.
And we said, let's go, let's do it. Let's see if we can get some different outcomes during this 120-day experiment. And we did. We started learning and doing some of the basics of Agile, much of which are still foundational in what I do today.
Mhm.
We started by making the work visible. We had a wall in the room, and we just kind of turned it into this giant Kanban board, the whole wall. Lots of blue painters tape on there, and kind of separating the backlog and the ready and the doing and the done
Mhm.
columns. And we had hundreds of sticky notes, all over this wall. Just visualizing the work really starts to give a lot of insight of what's happening.
Yeah.
We declared somebody the product owner. It was me actually at first. They start prioritizing the work, based on the highest value. They start breaking down the work into smaller pieces so we could put something in front of our stakeholders and show it to them and get some feedback, and then do it again. And we started doing these 2-week sprints and started getting regular feedback from our stakeholders and customers. And it wasn't perfect at all. It was quite clunky, really, at first. But things started changing. Our stakeholders rather started getting excited. We're building stuff they cared about and wanted.
Mhm.
So this 120-day full court press, it was successful. We decided to keep going. And a year later, this is a small company, but we had a handful of Scrum teams. We had other departments that started getting involved. Finance and HR. They had these big Kanban whiteboards that they put out in the open. Being transparent about what they were working on. And we found some customers that loved the tools we built. So we made some sales and had a positive impact on some customers. So it was a great first journey
Yeah.
down at that Apple.
And so you were doing that in 2012.
Yes.
When did Agile first come on the scene? I don't remember. I should know that, and I don't.
It's about 20 years ago now. I think
Okay. Okay.
I think we're passing the 21st anniversary of the Agile Manifesto right now. So it was about 20 years ago. It was a group
Wow.
of people that got together and said, there's a better way.
Yeah.
Is
Better
there?
way of doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So there had to be some bumps in the road. I can't imagine the process was all that smooth to bring that in. So what were some of the bumps?
Yeah, it definitely didn't go perfect. It wasn't smooth. There were a lot of learnings throughout. Still learning today, as you mentioned in the opening. Agile's about learning, that continuous learning, improvement mindset. It's truly foundational to what Agile's about. I'll tell you about one big bump. Right at the beginning of this 120-day full court press. Right after we started, my boss, the
Hmm.
CEO, had agreed to this experiment, and we got invited to a speakers dinner the night before a conference. It was the Agile Indie conference.
Oh
The
yeah.
coach we had hired to help us, he was speaking at the conference the next day, and he invited me and my boss to this dinner. And we're at a round table, a typical dinner round table, 8 to 10 people. And turns out we had one of the signatories of the Agile Manifesto at our table.
Oh
He,
wow,
he,
that's
he
cool.
was he was the keynote speaker the next day in the conference. I really had no idea who he was, but it kind of seemed important. And my boss started asking some questions, got some discussion going, and he got what he felt were some inadequate answers and maybe a questionable tone. He asked, like, well, in Agile, how do you know the end date? The delivery date. When something's going to be done. And this guy basically responded, "Why do you want to waste time having somebody estimate the done date? It's never right anyway, is it?" Uh, you know, and the conversation moved on. A short time later, though, my boss actually walked out before the dinner, and the next day he told me it was a cult.
Oh
But he let
wow.
but he let me keep going with the experiment. So
Yeah. Well, that shows a lot about the trust that he had in you, right? That if he felt
yeah,
that strongly about it and still let you continue,
yes,
he had to see some element of truth to what he'd heard, maybe a little bit,
yes,
but it's more about how he trusted you as the leader of bringing this into the organization.
that's right. Yes.
So when you think about that early experience, what are the key learnings? What are the biggest things that you learned in that first go round?
Yeah, Jeff, I think the biggest learning that I had from that experience, that first time doing Agile back at Fusion, is just go. Get started. You'll learn, you'll adjust. That's what I tell anybody now. Take small steps, look at the results, adapt, iterate. Don't wait till you think you know it all and you're
Hmm.
perfectly ready. Waiting for that perfect project, to go agile. You'll never get there. So just give it a try. Run an experiment.
Hmm.
And if you have some leaders or teams right now in your organizations that are asking, "Hey, can we try agile?" Please let them.
Yeah,
Give them an
yeah,
opportunity to experiment and try. And if you're serious, the other thing I learned early on, and I continue to believe today, hire some expertise. I
yeah,
I got
yeah,
lucky, honestly, in the vein of not knowing what you're doing and just going. As we started, I actually created a new role and I posted it publicly for hire. I called it an Agile project manager.
uh huh,
And
uh huh.
I still have a copy of that. It reads just like a project manager job description with a bunch of agile words mixed in, and there's really no such thing, but that's okay. An actual agile coach saw that posting, reached out to me. You mentioned him earlier, Aaron
Yep,
Copel,
Aaron.
Project
Yep.
Brilliant. And I still remember that first meeting with Aaron at a Panera, where he asked me a lot of questions about what we're trying to accomplish and why and what impediments we were seeing. And he started teaching me some of the basics. And we
Hmm.
ended up hiring him to help us, and he still helps me today. He's one of the best out there. So
Yeah,
getting expert help, I think it's really critical. Make the
yeah,
investment. It's not cheap. I'll tell you that right now. Agile coaches, good ones, are expensive and they are in demand. It is hard to get them, but you
yeah.
will go faster.
Well, and as you say, they're not teaching you necessarily a process; they're teaching you a mindset.
That's right.
And that requires a lot of skill. And what I've started to see is roles in organization now called agile coach.
Absolutely, that's right. We actually have them at CNO. We have an
Oh, do you really?
official
Okay.
job title called Agile Coach, and took us some time to get there.
Hmm.
Why and what, and what is this role? But we have that role now. And of course, the hard part, when you hire Agile coaches, whether contractors or employees, you actually have to start listening to what they suggest. And
Yeah.
that's not always easy. That's the hard part, really, because as you said, it's not just here's the 5 steps, do these things. It's a
Hmm.
mindset. It's a shift in how we've done things our whole careers. So it's
Yeah.
hard. It's a hard
Yeah.
transition.
Yeah. It's a lot different than the waterfall days when you're coding COBOL, isn't
Yes,
it?
definitely.
Well, let's talk agile at CNO Financial Group. What was it like when you arrived on the scene there at CNO?
Yeah. Well, so after Fusion, I made a couple other stops, helping companies shift towards Agile, and I joined CNO back in 2018. As a consultant at first. It
Hmm.
was right at the beginning of a large operations workflow modernization effort. It's insurance company operations, replacing some of the aging custom platforms they had, bringing in something modern. Pega is the platform that we were bringing in. Great platform. We were re-engineering a lot of the operational procedures, introducing automation, bringing RPA and bots and stuff in. It was this giant multi-year effort, millions of dollars, and there was this strong desire by leadership and everyone involved, really, to get it done faster, or
Mhm.
maybe a better way to say it, they want to get some return sooner, get some
Yeah.
value for the
Yeah.
investment. This whole initiative, this workflow modernization I'm talking about, it's really about, in this case, improving the end customer experience, the
Hmm.
policyholder in our case, serving them even better than we have been. And CNO had already decided when I got there that this was the opportunity to go all in with Agile. Like a lot of companies, they had done small experiments over the years with Agile, some Scrum teams working here or there. They saw some value out of it, but they recognized this was it. This was the big opportunity, and
Hmm.
I was lucky enough to be right at the beginning of that effort.
That's awesome. But we're talking about a incredibly large financial organization, and we've all heard the analogy. It's really hard to turn a big ship. How do you take something like that and have it become agile? So where'd you start?
That's a great question. There were a lot of things we focused on those first few months. What are we going to do first? Where do we start, as you said?
Hmm.
And it kind of starts with some how. How are we going to go about this? What's our initial approach? We're going to launch some Scrum teams. We had to consider the fact that we had offshore developers and how that would work. We had to think about, who's going to be the Scrum masters. We don't have Scrum masters in the company at that point.
Hmm.
Who are the product owners going to be? It should be from the business, not
Right.
IT.
Right.
And is the business ready for this? These product owners, and what does Scrum really mean to us? How are we
Hmm.
going to operate? So there's a lot of discussion and debate around the how, and then it starts with prioritizing the work, the what. Where do we
Yeah.
start?
Yeah.
It's this big multi-year thing. Well, where do we start? What's going to provide the most value initially? And we started to establish that product owner authority, if you will. The product owner's job is to maximize the value of what the team is building, prioritize the right stuff.
Hmm.
And of course, we had some agile experts in helping us as well, figuring out prioritization, including, of course, Aaron again.
Good. Yep.
He's been
Yep.
my coach from the beginning. And then that's the how and the what, but then you got to have some clarity on the why. Why are we doing this? It's a big change, this agile
Yeah.
thing. What are we trying to accomplish? What problems are we trying to solve here? Are we trying to go faster? Are we striving for better quality, or are we just wanting to experiment more? You got to figure that out. How will we know if we're successful? You got to have some
Hmm.
metrics and things to drive towards. Because everybody knows people focus on what you measure.
Yeah.
So let's
Yeah.
measure the right things to see if this is helping. And this concept of knowing why and measuring your outcome, and this applies if you're just a manager thinking about starting your first Scrum experiment, or if you're leading, if you're a leader going all in on and scaling big and agile. You got to know what you're trying to accomplish and why, and how you're going to measure success. And we got some great results those first few months after I started at CNO. I think we launched 3 official Scrum teams at the beginning, and they
Awesome.
actually delivered some brand new functionality that was used in production in about 90 days. And it grew from there. We launched some other experiments on how teams operate. Gave them a lot of freedom to try different things, and we were constantly refining and learning the best way for teams to operate and deliver value. And at its peak, we had over 20 Scrum teams on that initiative, that first one we
Wow.
started with. We even had an Agile coach based in India because that's where many of our
Yeah,
folks were.
sure. Yeah,
And
yeah.
it did, and we successfully completed. We delivered the value that was originally envisioned faster than we thought it could be done.
Okay, now you've used the word faster several times. Is Agile all about just speed, going faster?
Jeff, it can seem that way. I mean, that's a reasonable expectation to have because it will feel like you're going faster. But what's really happening, by making sure we're focused on the highest value work and probably stopping some of the low value work,
Yeah,
and
that's
giving
important
that
too.
and giving that high value work to high performing agile teams that deliver with predictability and quality, because they've been together as a team for a while and they've demonstrated what they can produce, we will get real value faster. But agile isn't really about going faster. It's about focusing on delivering the right stuff
Stuff.
faster.
Ah,
We had a program that we launched a couple of years ago, all agile. Went into it up front saying we're going to do this all agile. It was another one of our experiments. The business had an idea about a new product, and we had a couple of brainstorming sessions. What could this be? And we gave it to an agile team. 90 days later, the product was launched in the market, and we started getting feedback from real customers. I mean, that's fast.
yeah,
When you think
yeah.
about how we used to do things, you're lucky to have requirements signed off in 90 days, let alone, a product launched in the market.
That's
But,
right.
that only happens if you've created an environment where high performing teams can thrive. You know.
So, as we're talking about this, a question comes to mind, and this is kind of off track, maybe just a little bit, but you've mentioned you had teams in India. You're a large organization, so I imagine not everybody works in Indianapolis. How do you do Agile with distributed teams? Because in my mind, I picture Agile, everybody's all gathered around the Kanban board and you're sitting, elbow to elbow working. How do you do it in this distributed environment?
It's a great question, Jeff, because one of the foundational principles of Agile is face to face communication,
Hmm.
right? That's foundational to some of the benefits we see with Agile. So how do we deal with that when we're distributed? It feels obvious now, but a couple of years ago it wasn't quite as obvious, the use of video.
Yeah, yeah,
And obviously we use it extensively, like everybody does. And I think the way we've landed that works best is, if possible, and this was more possible pre-pandemic, have people in a room at a location on one video stream together. So you might have,
hmm
5 people in a room on video, and then
yeah,
5 people in another room in another location on video. So you get a little bit of the in person for some folks,
yeah,
and then using that video for the ultimate connection. Of course, now with everybody remote, it's just
yeah.
all video, and that's critical to it. And we get some pushback at times about being on video, but it
Hmm.
sure makes a difference being able to see people face to face,
It
like Agile
does. It really
says,
does.
to be able to read that body language.
Yeah. Even on this podcast, we use a platform called Zencaster, and for the first couple of seasons, maybe the first 3 seasons that we were doing this podcast, it was audio only. And just in the last several months, they added a video component. Now, our listeners listening to a podcast can't see the video, but I think it makes for a richer conversation
For sure.
between you and I because we can see each other and we can,
Yes.
we're seeing the head nods and the smiles and the
Yeah.
grins and it just makes it richer. So while we're on the concept of teams, you've used the phrase high performing teams. What is that and how do you create it?
The team is foundational really to all of this working. And I mentioned 20 scrum teams earlier, or 100 scrum teams, whatever you have. The team itself is really foundational to this all working. If you want high performing teams that can deliver a predictability that you can count on, that will deliver more value really towards your objectives than you thought they could, then got to set them up for success. And there are success patterns, that work, that others have done, and there's things as leaders that we have to do to create an environment for high performing teams. You can read a lot of stuff out there about high performing teams and how teams should act, and that's all important. But as leaders, there's several things that I found that Agile's taught me that I can do, or influence as a leader to help teams become more high performing. And the first is around creating permanent teams, standing teams that are dedicated. Put a team together, assign them to a function or a solution, and keep them in place permanently. And that's different than what we've typically done in the past. When we focus on projects, we fund a new team to focus on some initiative, and
Right.
then when they're done and hopefully they achieve the goal, we break up the team and everybody moves on to the next thing. Instead, keep the team permanent. And the value of that has been proven over and over again in Agile. Let them get to know each other, learn each other's strengths and weaknesses, and learn together and improve. And they will become a predictable, high performing team. So, permanent, standing, dedicated teams, I think, is critical. Of course,
Hmm.
funding is different when we talk about permanent teams. That has to be figured out.
Yep.
But I think that makes a huge difference. And then, the teams have to be cross functional, meaning they have to have all the skills they need on the team to do the work. If they have to go somewhere else to get help,
Hmm.
it takes time,
Yeah.
slows them down. And this is all about speed to decisions, high performing, making decisions fast. And there are trade offs that are built into how you set up your teams. So you have to be intentional about it. If your team needs to engage, enterprise architecture to review something once a month, you probably don't need a full-time architect on the team. But
Yeah.
if they have to engage the EA team continuously, then maybe the team will be faster and higher performing if an architect was assigned on that team full time,
Yeah.
or maybe 50% on that team. You got to find that balance, and it's speed to
Hmm.
decisions, right? So permanent standing teams, cross-functional teams, and then the last thing I think that leaders have to do, and this is really number one, uh, tell them what you want, build the vision, repeat it over and over, and then get out of their way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let the team decide how to do the work, how to operate together. They know best. Give them a scrum master, a servant leader, someone with that servant leader mindset to guide them. And as a leader, us, give them the room to experiment, to try new things. And innovation will happen if you let it.
Yeah.
But it has to be okay to fail. Everybody says that it has to be
Uh-huh.
okay to fail. But as a leader, how you react to any
Right.
failure will let them know if it's okay or not to
Yeah.
actually fail. This high performing team stuff, Jeff. It's really about shifting teams from a project orientation to a product orientation, rather than
Yeah.
a project team that forms and disbands when done, as we were just mentioning. A product team owns everything about that product or function. You could say claims in our case,
Yeah.
insurance.
Yeah.
The claims function. Put a team on that or teams on that, depending on how big it is, and let them own everything from ideation to new development to maintenance to problems on Saturday night. Let them own it
Yeah.
all for that
Yeah.
function. That's how you build high performing teams. We're doing a lot of that at CNO now. These permanent standing teams that become predictable, and it will feel fast,
Yeah.
when you have performing teams.
Well, and that difference between project and product, I've found with corporate IT. So our listeners are a mix of those that are corporate IT, working for some organization whose main product or service is not software or hardware, right? But
Yes.
we also have listeners that are in the tech sector building those things. I think for our corporate IT listeners, this concept of product is difficult to wrap your mind around,
Yes.
because it's almost like you become a product team for delivering products to the market. Only the market is your internal colleagues at your organization, and
That's
I
right.
think that's for at least for me that was a tough one to wrap my head around. So let's talk about gaining buy-in for a minute.
Yes.
We've all heard stories about less experiment and then the struggles and trying to get buy-in for this agile transformation because sometimes executives see huge dollar signs. So how did you go about getting buy-in for some of these things?
Yeah, buy-in is obviously critical, and it depends on where you are in your journey. Um, but start small, run small experiments, learn from them, give your team some space to innovate. And most of us, most leaders, we can fit in some small experiments somewhere here and there and try it out and see if it's helping. But as you grow and expand your agile transformation, there's going to be a variety of stakeholders along the way that you have to convince at some level about
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing. Some are easier than others, and hopefully you've already done a lot of the work to build great relationships throughout the organization. It makes it a lot easier when you're talking about a change like this. And it's obviously it's always really about delivering value that matters to any leader or
Yeah.
executive. What outcomes are we producing? What's in it for them? Every situation is different, but if agile isn't making things better in some way, it doesn't matter. You have to understand what matters to the company or the department or your boss. What are the objectives? What's keeping us from getting there? And ideally, our agile experiments are solving their problems,
Mm-hmm.
achieving their goals. Put together a hypothesis, run an experiment, see if you can get better results. Small experiment with one scrum team or something larger like we did at CNO with Pega, then
Yeah.
go measure the results and see what you learn. And you will learn some stuff as well, aside from the value you may deliver. And that's really important, that continuous learning we talked about. And then you learn about your teams and how they think and what motivates them and what's in their way and what holds
Yeah.
them back. And just start that continuous learning cycle. And anytime we're introducing change, which is what this is all about.
Right.
You're seeking buy-in, whether it's this weekend's release or launching an agile transformation. It's about what's in it for them.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah.
all humans, right? And our natural response to change is, what's it mean to me? And answering that question correctly for each of your stakeholders, that's key to getting
Yeah.
buy-in. And for some folks on the teams, it's, at the beginning, it's going to be, are you changing my responsibilities? Are you going to give me training? Or if you're a developer, you're like, well, I'm not going to have to test, am I? There's these questions up front that, people want to know. And then
Yeah.
there's,
Yeah.
for other people, it's more about, well, when's my project going to be done? How do I
Right.
report project status? How much is this costing us? Is it costing
Yes.
us more than the way we used to do things? And then there's another level of stakeholders that they want to know, are we advancing towards our goals faster?
Yeah.
Are we improving the customer experience? Has quality improved? So understanding your stakeholders' needs and goals and objectives and helping them solve that faster and measuring it as you go, that's how we get continuous buy-in.
Well, one of the things about Agile that has just fascinated me over the last several years, you mentioned this at the outset, it really began in the realm of software development. And then it spread to more and more of the traditional IT functions, including things like DevOps and all those different varieties and roles that you see within this. But what I've started to see is other parts of the organization start to adopt agile agile marketing. You can google it and see all this stuff on agile marketing. I think you mentioned finance with a kanban board, and was that part of the original goal, or how did that happen? How does it spread beyond development and IT?
That's a great question. And I don't think it was the original goal, honestly. Agile started as, you know, we think there's better ways to develop software. I mean, that's really the original problem they started with. But what happened is, people started seeing the success that was happening with this new way of building solutions together. and they wanted to be part of it. Like, well, how can I apply some of that same thinking to what I'm doing? And it does typically start in IT. People start seeing the success. They want to be part of it. They want to learn. They try it out, and they can. You don't have to be building software. As we've talked about, Agile is a mindset. We can apply it to anything we're doing, finance or legal or HR or marketing or anything.
Hmm.
There's some basic steps that anyone can take. Make the work visible, be transparent, prioritize based on highest value, break it down into small pieces so you can get feedback faster, deliver it, assess the results, evaluate that what was done, learn from it, adjust, embrace the change that comes with it, and then iterate again.
Embrace
And
the change.
embrace the change. And change is
Yeah,
actually good, right?
yeah, yeah.
Requirements change, priorities change. That means we are getting better clarity on what we are trying to accomplish.
Hmm.
So just expect changes and accommodate it. It's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Uh, and some of the stuff we're talking about here, the basics of Agile outside of IT, it's nothing that didn't even mention software or
Right,
IT. It's
right,
nothing
right.
about Scrum or any other Agile. It's a mindset. It's about being Agile. So not getting caught up in doing Agile, following some
Yeah.
process or framework. About changing how you think, and you can apply that to anything really.
I love that. Being agile versus doing agile.
Yes.
So, Patrick, paint us a picture. Where is this going at CNO? What's next? What's on the horizon for you guys?
Well, a lot of it starts with scaling, and growing. Scaling is where it gets fun. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
fairly easy to see some value from a few Scrum teams, but I mean, because there's proven ways to do it. You can go read the Scrum guide, hire a coach, and you can get started next week. But how do you get to dozens of Scrum teams or hundreds of Scrum teams? And we haven't gotten to hundreds yet, but dozens, yeah, yes. And there are several very successful frameworks out there for scaling Agile big in an enterprise. Again, you can hire some expertise and go follow one of them. Proven success patterns. Again, we're following the scaled Agile framework safe at CNO, and I think
Mm-hmm.
it's just right for us right now. It's working perfect for us. But when scaling, there's things that I've learned as we've been scaling. Again, what leaders can do to help support and accelerate the scaling of an agile transformation, because this is when it's getting big, right? And it's
Yeah,
getting
yeah.
impactful, and leadership has to be on board, that buy-in. So there's things that we have to do as leaders to help make this thing happen, and that we're working on every day at CNO.
Mm-hmm.
You know, let people experiment and try on their own. I mean, you have to have an official path for agile teams to launch, and you should, we do. But if other teams want to go on their own because they're interested and excited, they want to try out and experiment, let them. They may not
Yeah.
go through the official training. They may not be using Jira right, but they're going to learn a lot, and
Mm-hmm.
the momentum is going to start growing. And you'll figure out how to fold them in and make them official at some point, but give them some freedom. And as soon as you can, and this is something we are working on right now too, start connecting the outcomes from your agile transformation to the actual department or company goals or objectives.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, that's all that leadership really cares about. Are we
Right.
moving closer to the goals? They don't really care about Agile. It's interesting that you have 27 Agile teams and you've trained 350 people and you're measuring velocity and backlog health and all those other Agile metrics.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing people hear me say a lot is all this Agile stuff does not matter if we are not making progress against our strategic objectives.
Right.
And
Right.
you will struggle to scale if you don't achieve things that matter to leadership. Um, the last thing I'll say that leaders can do to really affect the scaling and the transformation happening in an organization: get engaged, get involved, be part of the transformation. There's so many things for leaders to do that are critical, and I see too many leaders sit back and watch. Hey, there's that agile transformation thing going on over there.
Yeah.
We touched on it earlier, but the leader's primary job: clarity of vision. Where are
Yeah.
we going? Why are we going? And it's not once and done, of course. Constantly promoting that vision, building excitement, repeating it. Most important job of a leader. It's how people understand that their work matters.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and there's some other things. Leaders are the ones that have the power sometimes to clear impediments. So you got to check in with your teams every day. What's in their way? Again, it goes to that
Hmm.
speed to decision making. Leaders are the ones that can change policies or structures or old ways of doing things. You might need to influence the release process. As the team start embracing continuous delivery, you might
Yeah.
need to work with HR on new job titles like Scrum Masters or Agile coaches, right? You
Hmm.
might need to advocate for an increase in training because we got to help everybody understand what we're doing here.
Yeah.
And then celebrating success as well, and that's in the leader's control. You are a cheerleader.
Yeah.
Show up at the agile ceremonies your teams are suggesting. Praise the team when they deliver some amazing stuff. Reward experimentation. Recognize when people are adopting this mindset we're trying to strive towards. Even celebrate when they fail fast,
Yeah.
because we
Yeah.
learned something, because that just ignites momentum when we celebrate. um, so we're on that scaling journey at CNO. All these things I just talked about, continuing to build and mature that agile delivery machine in
Hmm.
IT, and then working this year. We're working on how do we get great at identifying and prioritizing and funding and governing all the right work to
Yeah.
feed to that agile delivery machine. And as I said, then also shifting that agile success story to a business success story,
Yeah.
because agility is really about the ability to adapt and respond to change.
Hmm.
So when we think about applying that to an entire organization, I call that enterprise agility,
Right.
which is the ability for an organization to adapt and shift and react when things change with speed. And that's the key, with speed. There's that word again, right? How
Yep.
fast, how nimble
Yeah.
are we as an
Yeah.
organization? Does policy get in our way? Or, how well do we, do cross department collaboration or negotiation? How fast are we able to recognize that, a hypothesis didn't prove what we hoped? And let's
Hmm.
shift that funding and energy elsewhere. How fast can we make those pivot or persevere decisions? And that concept of enterprise agility, great example of that all companies had to exercise about 2 years ago now, right? When suddenly
Yes.
everybody had to shift to work from home.
Some people
IT
did it better than
department,
others.
yes, IT departments and HR departments and cybersecurity departments and legal departments, they all got together and they had to collaborate and adjust and shift with speed to keep the
Hmm.
business going, right?
Yep.
That's enterprise agility, and everybody was able to pivot to different degrees at different companies. But I know at CNO we had several thousand people around the globe shift home. Many of them with
Yeah.
new devices that we just built from some spare machines, and we got them operational in like under 9 days.
Yeah.
Which is an amazing demonstration of enterprise agility, and that's what we strive for in all our decision making as an organization. The structures and processes and people, can they adapt and shift and speed
Yeah.
as necessary? That's enterprise agility.
I love that, Patrick. And, we're coming up on time for our conversation today. And as we've talked about, and I know that you've listened to Status Go in the past. So I always love to end with a very strong call to action, a very explicit call to action. What are one or two things that our listeners should go do tomorrow because they listened to our conversation today?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would say to our listeners and to anybody really, commit to a true experiment. Go all in and give it a try. Find somebody to help you if you need. Introduce the agile mindset into your work, into your team. See if it improves your outcomes in some way. See what you learn about your team and the work that you do. You'll probably learn something that you did not anticipate, and I bet you'll be better for it.
That's awesome. That is a great recommendation and a great place to start. Experiment and learn.
Yes.
Patrick, I got to thank you. This has been awesome. I really appreciate you carving out the time to talk with us today. Thank you so much, and we need to have you back on and go even deeper the next time.
Love it, Jeff. Appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. Enjoy the conversation.
To our listeners, if you have a question or want to learn more, go to intervision.com. The show notes will provide links and contact information. This is Jeff Tunn for Patrick Bogan. Thank you so very much for listening.
You've been listening to the Status Go podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes or get more information at intervision.com. If you'd like to contribute to the conversation, find Intervision on Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Thank you for listening. Until next time.